Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this podcast, An Introduction to Pensions. My name is Emma Holt. I'm a senior lecturer from Manchester Metropolitan University. This webcast is held jointly by the Chartered Banker Institute, the ICAEW in the North West, and Manchester Metropolitan University. In a moment, we will commence the webcast, which will be recorded, and I'll be handing over to today's speakers to introduce themselves. Please note that the webcast will be available on demand shortly after the event has concluded, so that you can revisit the webcast should you wish to do so. Please do ask any questions as we go along. Can we ask that you put the questions in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, rather than the chat box. And at the end of the session, when the presenters have finished giving their presentations, they will work through those questions and answer them. And if there are any questions that we don't get to during the webcast, then we'll make sure that they are answered subsequently. So I'd now like to hand over to our speakers, Joanne Bambrick and Joshua Underwood, to introduce themselves and to talk about why they're here giving this presentation. Thank you.
Joanne first.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Joanne Bambrick and I'm a senior lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University. I'm here with Joshua today. We're going to talk to you about pensions. We'll give Joshua a second to say where he's from.
Thanks, Joanne. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Josh Underwood. I'm an independent financial advisor and I help families and individuals in the high net worth space do everything that it is that they want to do in life. So I help advise people on different things, from investments to pensions to insurance to tax planning and different arrangements. And what we're here to talk to you about today is an introduction to pensions, and that forms a significant role in what I do with helping families plan for the future and for a lot of people plan for retirement. So as if by magic, I will share my screen and try and get some slides on there, and then we can crack on for you. Joanne, has that popped up okay?
Fine, I can see everything ready to go. Introduction to pensions, me and you, we can start.
Excellent. So the purpose of today, guys, is to really sort of go through an introduction to pensions. And when I was speaking to Joanne prior to this session, we sort of between us, we can talk about everything pensions, for hours on end all day, really. And to sort of distill that down into sort of 40 minutes, 45 minutes of content for you was quite challenging, because there's quite a lot of areas to cover. But what we want to do is just touch on the very basics of each area here, starting with state pensions, because that's something that's very important for everybody. And then sort of going on to different arrangements that you can have in place by yourself throughout your career, such as workplace pensions, defined benefit pensions. For anybody working in the public sector, you may have come across some of these. Really good stuff. And for people that aren't employed, who are potentially self-employed or running their own business, then personal pensions are something that is really important. Now, we didn't want this to just be something where me and Joanne sort of speak at you for the next sort of 45 minutes or so, just to give you a few things that you can take away with yourself, that you might find useful, that you and your spouse and your household can sort of put in place, and something that can help you from day one, really. So at the very end, we'll do a bit of a summary, but I'll give you a few things that are useful as well. But we'll start by jumping into state pensions, and we'll go from there.
Excellent. So we decided that when we were going to talk about pensions, it's all about where you're going to be in the future. And one of the main things that you need to understand, or anybody needs to understand, is what money is going to be available to them. So we decided that to kind of go forward, we need to talk about the state pension, actually what people think they are going to get. So the state pension changed. It's actually called the new state pension. There is a basic state pension that grandparents may have just now, but anybody that was due to retire from the 6th of April 2016 is under the new state pension. Now, for that, there's obviously an eligibility that you have to make sure that you get it. It's not automatically given to everybody. You need to have paid some contributions, and they come from your national insurance record. So main key features are you need to have paid these national insurance contributions for 10 years. So that can be 10 years working, that can actually be 10 years receiving benefits, because that also entitles you to that national insurance record as well. Now, to get the full state pension, you actually need to have paid these contributions for 35 years to give you a full pension of £185.15 per week. And one of the things that's really interesting is the poverty line for a pensioner is classed at £144 a week for an individual person. So they're giving you more to kind of keep you above that poverty line, but it's definitely maybe not enough for your future. And we've got our poll on this, have we, Joshua, that comes next?
So if we can have the first poll, that'd be excellent. If everyone can have a look at this for us, because just as Joanne said, you need 35 years of national insurance contributions to get a full state pension. What was really interesting is just to ask everybody, do you actually know how many years of national insurance contributions you have? And just if you can answer that for me.
I actually have to really think about this.
Because it's
really, automatically.
Absolutely, it's really important, because one of the key things that I talk about with the families that I work with is actually, you know, if you retire today at a state pension age at 67, which is soon to move to 68, if you retire today in your 60s with good health and comfortable finances, you have almost a 50% chance to live to 100 years of age based on the latest assumptions. So your state pension will be in payment possibly for over 30 years. If you haven't made the most of your 35 years of national insurance contributions and you don't quite have that full state pension, so for you and your spouse as well, it's really important that the first thing you do is think about, okay, can I make up some extra years? Because actually, if you don't have the full 35 years, you can make voluntary national insurance contributions to purchase some additional years if you've actually missed them. And that's
we were talking about those yesterday, weren't we? At there being about £15, £16 a week in order to make that up. So it could be quite substantial an amount that you would need to pay to make sure you have those contributions. Absolutely.
So just seeing the poll come through there, you know, just there's about 2/3 of you suggested that you know how many years of NI contributions you have, which is fantastic. But there is 1/3 of you on here that don't know. So it's really important that you do think about that, because actually if you and your spouse, by the time you get to retirement age, if you haven't made the most of those 35 years, if you're in a fortunate enough position, maybe you've retired early, for example, maybe you've managed to retire at 60 or something like that, or maybe you've had a gap in your working career for whatever reason, you know, maybe it's for children, or maybe it's for traveling or a sabbatical, whatever it is. Really important that you do make the most of that. So if you haven't got a full state pension, then make sure you do, and you can get a forecast from the government. So so from the back of my brain somewhere, I think it's a BR19 form from the gov.uk website.
Yeah, you can go online. It will give it you automatically online and tell you when you're due to retire, so the exact date and how much you're going to get based on the current state pension. It obviously doesn't inflate that for you, but it tells you what the current amount is. So that's something that people might want to do once this session's finished.
Fantastic, excellent. So just to give you a bit more sort of context really before we go on to the different options that you can have in terms of generating some further income from your pensions beyond the state pension. Some latest figures came out the last year from the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association, and to save you some bedtime reading, I thought I would put some sort of distill that down into some figures for you. They would suggest that now that you, for a comfortable retirement, so somewhere where you can enjoy yourself, you can go on some holidays, and have a comfortable lifestyle. For a single person, that's about 33,000, and for a couple, it's not double because you have some shared household expenses, but it's, you know, potentially nearly 50,000. So that's not, you know, it's not an insignificant amount of money to find every year. So it's really important that you are thinking about options of generating further income beyond your state pension, and obviously this is where pensions of all different types can come in. If you can just imagine for me a moment where you know, at some point your salary is going to stop. For everybody it's going to stop. It's a very daunting prospect to think about, And it's really important that you do think about the future and where the income's going to come from. So once you've got your state pension maximised, which we know is the 35 years, then the other things we can come on to think about to sort of build that gap. But just a bit of an interesting point on there, that the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association suggested that a Netflix subscription is now included in what would be a comfortable retirement, which I thought was quite
up to date though, isn't it? It's kind of looking at what people actually do now, where the money is. So it's not based on figures where they don't include anything. So it's quite an accurate figure that they're saying when we're near retirement.
Absolutely, definitely. So, you know, to sort of expand on that a bit further, just before we jump into the different other pension options that you have available to you, if you are that single person looking for a comfortable retirement, again, these are just sort of average figures. If you wanted 33,000 a year in retirement every year, and you have your full state pension, which is about 9,500, you need to find yourself nearly £24,000 a year every year for the rest of your life. So quite a lot of money to think about there. And again, for a couple, if you've got 2 full state pensions and looking to achieve that sort of £50,000 level of income as a comfortable retirement, then there's about 30,000 to find as a household. So quite a daunting prospect, quite a scary prospect, but hopefully the things we're going to come on to talk about can help you sort of understand where that sort of income can come from.
Yeah, I think we need to kind of talk about how you can find that shortfall. For an individual, that's quite significant to find on your own at nearly £24,000. But obviously, when you've got a couple, we're looking at an extra £15,000 each. So how do we go about kind of doing that, and where does that money come from? Which is where we're going to go to next. Have we got that next slide? Okay, so we're going to talk about the types of schemes that are actually available to you. So things that you could maybe participate. So we're going to give you a slight overview and then talk at them in a little bit more detail. So there's 2 main types of schemes really that you can use. So it's an occupational, we're going to call it a work-based pension for the defined contribution. So something where you and your employer both contribute to it. It goes into a pot, and at the end that pot is used to provide your pension in whatever means that you might decide to take it. And there are lots of options for kind of taking it later on. Not something we're going to come on to so much today, I don't think, as we're just on the introduction side. As well as obviously a defined contribution, or this work-based pension, there's also a defined benefit pension as well. Now these are ones which are much rarer. They tend to be within the public sector. We were having a conversation about this the other day. I've got one that comes from a private sector, but from earlier on in my career as well. And then from there we go on, and the other option is what if you don't work, or if you're self-employed and there's no employer. So we thought it'd be important just to tell you a little bit about a personal pension. Again, they come under this defined contribution, whereby you are going to contribute into a fund with investment and see what happens at retirement. So I think the first one that we're going to kick off with and give you a bit more detail about is a work-based under a defined contribution scheme.
Excellent. So sort of a workplace pension under a defined contribution scheme, this is what I would assume most people that are listening to this would have. So about 10 years ago, the government introduced something called auto-enrolment. And prior to that, employers had no real sort of mandate to provide a pension scheme of any significant value until about 10 years ago, where now every employer in the country has to provide you with a suitable pension scheme. Now, what it does mean is workplace pension schemes where you contribute and your employer contributes. They have come on leaps and bounds, and a lot of these are really good now. You have some fantastic investment options in there. And often employers are now not just contributing the minimum amounts that they have to based on the auto-enrolment rules set by government. Some people are contributing a lot more. So it's a really good sort of development in this space over the last 10 years, whereas previously there was sort of found wanting, hence why the government stepped in. But now workplace pensions, which is what I would assume most people on this call have today, unless you're in the public sector, as Joanne said. So there's a few very key sort of basics to your workplace pension. So if you are part of a pension and don't really know what it's doing for you or how it works, if after this it should give you a good understanding. So the first point here is you pay into a pension. So, and your contributions get tax relief. So what I mean by that is, rather than you taking your income in your paycheck at the end of the month and you pay your income tax and your national insurance on there, your contribution will go straight into your pension via something called salary sacrifice, which you may have come across in your pension paperwork somewhere. So rather than paying tax and national insurance, your contributions are deducted from your salary and go straight into your pension. There is no other investment in the UK that can operate salary sacrifice contributions and you get tax relief like that. So it really is the single most tax efficient way of saving money for the future. And this is why pensions have been improved so much over the last 10 years. So that is really good stuff. The second thing, which is really important, is the employer contributes to your pensions as well. Now, this is essentially free money. This is on top of your salary. This is on top of your own contributions. And some people will contribute maybe a small percentage. Some employers will contribute a small percentage. Some might choose, if they're trying to be competitive, particularly in an industry which is highly competitive, such as the ones at chartered banker institutions and things like this, where you're highly educated individuals. Some employers will choose to contribute a higher percentage. Now, there's something to be aware of here, so everybody listening. Sometimes your employer will contribute up to a certain level based on your contributions. So one thing to take away is to double check with your employer what is the maximum they will put into your pension. And for example, some may put in 10% if you put in 10%. So if you're not putting in 10% into your pension, then you're missing out on some additional contribution from your employer. So really important that you make the most of that where you can.
I think it's interesting as well to think about those minimum amounts that we need to pay in as an employee and as an employer at the 5% and 3%. So even right at the beginning, they're paying in so much more, on top of your salary, like you said. So that increases actually when you have your salary. Technically, you're receiving that bit more, which goes in to be invested and isn't subject to tax and national insurance as well.
Absolutely. So really, really tax efficient. And again, the free money on top is just a bonus, really. Excellent stuff. So the contributions that you pay in and your employer pays in, they're invested for the longer term. And any growth that you have within your pension is tax-free. So you don't have to pay any sort of income tax or anything like that in terms of the growth on your pension. And this is another section where the investments within pensions that are now available, they've come on leaps and bounds from where they were. Previously, there were generally quite limited options in terms of what investments you have. Whereas now a lot of options, they're called lifestyle funds, where there's automatic investment management, there's automatic risk management for you. And that's probably a conversation for another day, but all you need to know is that sort of automatic investment options within your workplace pension are very, very good now, and 9 times out of 10 they are fantastic for your average investor. But again, the growth on there is tax-free. And as something that Joanne came to talk about, ultimately you can take an income from your workplace pension. There's a few options to take from this. They are broadly split into 2 camps. You can exchange your pension from a guaranteed income, and that's called an annuity. So for some of you on this call, the generation above or the 2 generations above, they were quite popular. But the rules and around those have changed a little bit, and the sort of environment for those have changed. Not many people are doing that now. Most people are leaving their pension invested, so it grows in the market still, and they draw off a flexible income from their pension. Now, a few key things on there: 25% of your pension is tax-free. So if you have 100,000 in your pension, by the time you retire, you can access up to 25,000 without paying any tax at all, but the rest of it will be taxable just like your income is today.
And you can choose, can't you? You can either have 25% tax-free every time you draw down, or you can take out that money at the very start and then draw down from it. I reckon that there's another podcast all within kind of pension freedom rules and the way that you can take your pension that's probably building in the back there. But yeah.
Absolutely. Just as I said at the start, the amount that we can cover here is enormous. And it did make me laugh. There was something back in 2006, the 6th of April 2006, something called pension simplification that the government released, which was their intention to make things sort of really nice and easy for everybody, but in reality it sort of got exponentially complicated over the last 15 years or so. You know, as a financial advisor, that does keep me in a job, I guess. So I can't complain.
I was going to say that's definitely the bit where you're needed, because they are so complicated, and especially the moving around. You have to think about, do you take your pension with you? Now people don't stay in a job for kind of 30, 40 years and only take a pension from one job. There's that movement. So you need to decide whether you freeze a pension, move a pension, and all those have quite huge implications, really.
Absolutely. So the basics of your workplace pension, which I said, well, most people will have, you pay in, you get tax relief, which is excellent. So the more you can pay in, the taxman gets less of your wage, which is good stuff. Your employer pays in, which is on top of your salary, which is free money. So make sure you're making the most of whatever pension scheme rules that they have. Make sure you're getting the most from your employer. And the growth is tax-free in there, so really good stuff. As I said, there is no other investment option in the UK that is as tax efficient as your pension, so make sure you make the most of them. Just to give you an example of why they're so tax efficient and why this is not available in any other pension, like an ISA or any other portfolio that you could have. If you earn £25,000, you could take your 5% of your pension contribution. Just as an example, if you took that as income, you would pay basic rate tax and national insurance on there, and in your pocket at the end of the month you would have £71 if you wanted to take £104 in your wage. Now if you contribute that to your pension and your employer contributes 5%, you double that 104 on day one, and it goes straight into your pension without paying any tax. So for the cost of £71 in your take-home pay, you can have 208 going into your pension on day one. So there's no other investment that can do that. So the tax relief that you get on your contribution and the availability of employer contributions just means that you multiply your money from day one, which is brilliant.
And then invested somewhere that has a much better rate of return than if you put it into a bank account or a savings account.
Absolutely. I don't know if anybody's sort of seen the interest rate on their bank account. It probably comes in pence or pounds at the moment, and it's yeah, the sort of interest you're getting in bank accounts isn't brilliant. So the more you can contribute to a pension, you can see there, if you're maybe a higher rate taxpayer earning 60,000, you know, to contribute £145 of your take-home pay, you're going to be getting 500 going into your pension if your employer is operating what I would call a 5% match. But again, if they're going to match you higher than 5%, definitely make the most of that where you can. Now, anyone on this call today that is much younger, so possibly if you are in your 20s or 30s, for example, and you've joined the call, absolute credit to you for joining an Introduction to Pensions seminar straight away.
I think it's great, start investing early.
Absolutely, but it's just the right time to start thinking about pensions. The longer you leave it, you leave yourself with a steeper hill to climb. So anybody who's looked at what compound growth is, you will know that investing longer term every month is an exponential curve. Now, just to show you what this means, a few sort of examples here. If you're 25 and you contribute £300 a month, and that's between you and your employer, £300 a month with an average sort of 5% growth rate, you would end up with nearly £500,000 in your pension by the time you are 65. So very, very good stuff, a very respectable pension at retirement.
Goes a long way to actually meeting that comfortable retirement as well.
Absolutely. Whereas the red line on here, who is somebody who starts pension contributions at 35, so a little bit later, the same amount, £300, and they end up with about half in their pension that the person in that purple line started at 25. So it has a huge difference. And just to show you even further, the blue line on here is somebody who starts later again. So maybe they start thinking about pensions at 40, so they've left it a little bit longer. They contribute double the amount per month for the rest of their career until 65. They never catch up the person who started earlier at 25, contributing a smaller amount. So just goes to show you the value of your workplace pension scheme, guys, can be absolutely enormous. And as I said right at the very start, at some point your salary is going to stop, and it's up to you to generate something in the background that's going to replicate some income for you. And as I said, anyone in your 20s and 30s, just start paying in as much as you can. You don't have to pay in absolutely loads straight away, and build it up slowly over your career, but just start as soon as you can.
Can also go for part-time jobs, and I think we've got a lot of students on the call that will have a chance to join an employer scheme. And even if you start putting in, because you can freeze it, you can move it, so it never goes away. It's somewhere where they will gain the interest, and it will be invested for you. So even paying in smaller amounts now, by the time you get to late 60s, from paying in your 20s, that's a considerable amount of money that will be there for you to have at retirement.
Absolutely, and you just brought me on to the point for the next slide. Quite nice.
Oh, look at that, it was just as if by magic.
So there's 3 key factors that are going to determine how much you have in your pension by the time you get to retirement. That is how much you've paid in. And the best piece of advice I can give anybody is, as you go through your career, if you ever get pay rises and promotions, just increase your own employee contribution, and just increase it by even 1%. Some people think, oh, I need to go from sort of 5 to 10%. Absolutely not. Just increase it from 5 to 6%, or maybe if you're already at 7 and you get a pay rise, go to 8%, and slowly just do that over your career, because then between your employer contributions and your contributions that you're slowly increasing throughout your career, by the time you get into your 50s and 60s, you'll find you're making a really good contribution on a percentage basis. The second thing is how long you've paid in for. So again, I was just touching on the last slide there. So again, if you haven't started, make sure you get yourself started in some sort of pension. It doesn't matter how much or how little, just get yourself going with one, again, as soon as you can. And do not opt out, guys. There is an option through auto enrolment where, yes, every employer's got to provide a pension scheme. You do have the option to remove yourself from that, but you will lose the tax relief on your contributions, but you will also lose out on the employer contributions. They will stop as well. Opting out would only be recommended in very extreme situations, if somebody was going through financial difficulty, for example. But aside from that, I would always encourage everybody to remain in a pension scheme throughout their whole career.
I suppose that's one of the really good advantages from the government as well, is the opt-out and it wasn't opt-in. Nobody wants to fill in that form to have to kind of do it. At least they're already in it, and it's when they come back they have to opt out. You've got to fill the form in, you've got to pull yourself out of it, and it's that bit more. So I think it's great that the kind of government has recognised that everybody needs to be in a pension scheme, and then you can take the decision from there. And most people, and like Joshua said, unless it's you know, extreme circumstances, that you wouldn't actually take that and opt out.
Absolutely. And the final thing as well is the investment performance. So yes, the investment grows tax-free, but as I said, a lot of the workplace pension schemes now that you are automatically enrolled in, they've got some fantastic investment options in there, really good value, really good opportunities for growth. You know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, some of these were sort of found wanting and were quite limited, but since the government have got involved, regulations increased, it really improved. And the investment performance can be really good, and just as Joanne said before, a lot better than you can get in any sort of cash savings. So definitely worth contributing as much as you can for as long as you can, and make sure it's performing well.
And even if we go through some rough times, I think, you know, of times when performance might not be great, it goes over such a long period of time that it takes that into account. So there might be bits when you think your pension isn't performing as well as it should, but that will always then improve as you come out of these harder times. So it's definitely worth the longevity of it.
Absolutely. You're always going to get investment risk and volatility with pensions. It's going to go up and down on a daily basis. I probably wouldn't encourage somebody to look at it every day, because you drive yourself a little bit bonkers watching it go up and down. And every so often we do get a significant market impact, like COVID, like what's happening in Eastern Europe had an impact as well. And obviously the 2008 financial crash had a big impact. All you need to remember though, guys, is keep paying in, because as a pension investor, if the market comes off temporarily, all your contributions and your employer contributions they're just going to be buying cheap shares at the bottom of the market. So when you've got such a long timeline to retirement, for some people it's up to 40 years, all you need to be concerned with is just continue to pay in. So that sort of brings us to the close of a workplace pension in terms of a defined contribution, which sort of 99% of people will have now, unless you work in the public sector. But sort of as Joanne does as a lecturer in the public sector, she is very lucky to have exposure to a defined benefit scheme. And I'll hand over to Joanne.
Yeah, and I think for me, I am very unusual in the case that I actually have 3 of them. So I worked for a pensions company earlier in my career, and I had a defined contribution with them, which is actually frozen. I have seen one of the questions. I was looking while Joshua was talking. So when you leave a pension, you can decide whether to transfer it with you or freeze it. But because defined benefit schemes are so rare and the contributions are so good, that you can kind of have the opportunity to leave them where they are. So we thought it was kind of important to give you some of the key points in case you do have one of these schemes and you are within the public sector. So there's been a bit of a change. These used to be based on a final salary. So you would work your whole career and within that pension scheme, your final salary when you either exited that scheme and went somewhere else, or if you retired and you were in that scheme, it would be based on your final salary at the time. This has now moved to a career average. There is obviously a lot of people don't like the career average because it's kind of deemed that throughout your career you will go up, so you want that final salary. However, it does benefit those that have taken a career break, maybe have gone off and had children. They might come back part-time. So if you've got that career average, if you were on a high salary before, and now obviously lots of people are having children later in life, late 30s, early 40s, when your kind of salary dips, it kind of keeps that average going. So it can be based on your average, and that can be an average across your whole of your pension, it can be an average over the last 3 years. It depends on your scheme rules. It's based on your earnings at retirement or when you leave the scheme. So if you leave the scheme and it's frozen, then obviously there you would have however many number of years you'd worked at that point. It then is based on a fraction. So if you've done 10 years, then you would do 10 divided by 60 and times that by your final salary or your career average. If you're on an 80th scheme, obviously not looking to give you as much, it'd be 10 divided by 80, and again you would times that by your salary, whether it be final salary or career average. I say it's a great thing for an employee. Actually, on a defined benefit scheme, all the risk lies with the employer, which is very different to the work-based scheme. So on a work-based scheme, you're paying in, your employer's paying in, but at the end, that investment pot is down to whatever kind of has performed in your investment. But under a defined benefit scheme, they obviously need to give you that percentage of your salary. So it's a really good position to be in now. Contributions are still quite high and they can be changed because employers need to look at how much you need to contribute and how much they need to contribute in order to pay out that liability at the end. But the risk does not lie with the employee or with the employer. Again, the employee contributions still on your salary sacrifice, so they still come out before tax and national insurance. It comes out on your payslip and you see it alongside your tax there. I suppose the great thing about a defined benefit scheme is I don't know if it's a great thing or not, it doesn't give you the opportunity to draw down your money. So obviously on these work-based pensions, which are defined contributions, and they have all these pension freedom rules, you can take the money how you want. Under a defined benefit scheme, it's not the same. You can still take your 25% tax-free cash. That's still there. You can take as much of that 25% as you want. You don't have to take the full amount. You can choose to have a larger pension, but they will give you the rest as an annuity. Okay, so what more like your traditional pensions. I know if you're on the call and you're kind of in the public sector, the teachers' pension scheme has a sliding scale, so you can see how much tax-free cash you can take to how much pension as an annuity will be there at the end. It is very much something that should be cherished. And I think, wouldn't you say, Joshua, that it's not something you should be transferring out of particularly, and definitely something you should freeze instead?
Yeah, definitely, really. There are sort of rare occasions if you've picked up a defined benefit pension where transferring them can, you know, to something that's invested is the right thing to do, but very, very rarely is that the right thing to do. 99 times out of 100, if you've been lucky enough to get one of these defined benefit pensions, and I've put a little picture on here where they're sort of these relics in a museum, because in the private sector they're just not available anymore. You know, the famous case of British Home Stores that they went bust, didn't they, about 5 or 6 years ago now. That was because they couldn't afford to maintain their defined benefit scheme, because they're still paying out salaries through a pension to people who retired 30 years ago. So unless you are now backed by the government, if you work in sort of teaching or the fire service, or whatever it is like that, then you still have access to defined benefit pensions, and really make the most of them. They are fantastic. There's no investment risk. There's no ups and downs with the stock market. They're just going to pay you a guaranteed level of income from a certain age for the rest of your life. So really important.
And that's why they're so rare, isn't it? The fact that it's got to be a pot that people are paying into now, and then other people are taking out of that pot. So that pot's always going to be there until you ultimately no longer need a pension. And I suppose that's one of the good things about them. It's that guaranteed income for the rest of your life, really.
Absolutely. I think we've got a second poll to run as well, which would be really interesting. And it's just to see if you know whether your pensions are defined contribution or defined benefit. So just to clarify again, do you know if your pension is a pot of money that you and your employer are contributing and that's invested, which is defined contribution? Or do you have a defined benefit pension, which, as Joanne said, there's no investment involved and it's just going to pay you a percentage of your salary at retirement?
Do you know what I was thinking as well? And I wonder, can always put it on the Q&A if they want to. Wonder how many people have one of each. I mean, I think I'm very rare in that I've got 3 that sit under a defined benefit, but I wonder if people have one of each or have moved.
Absolutely, yeah. So a lot of people that I work with, a lot of families that I work with, even if they've worked in the private sector, if they're sort of retiring now, obviously they've worked over the last 40 years or so, so going back a generation, you would have access to them in the private sector. As we sort of keep progressing through time, and
they'll be like gold dust, won't they?
They're going to
eventually there'll be none.
It wouldn't surprise me if at some point the public sector does move to a defined contribution, but that would take a risky government to go through that process. But interesting.
We just looked at the results, and it's quite surprising that 7 don't know what it is. So I would say at the end of this call, as to find out with before into how much you pay and how much the employer pays, is about kind of definitely finding out what type of scheme that you are invested in, because then you can also look at upping your contributions and do it. I mean, you can up your contributions into a defined benefit scheme. It isn't that you can't. And actually what it does on a defined benefit scheme is if you up your contributions, you don't obviously add to that pot. But what you can ultimately do is buy years or days. Okay, so if you're at, I was looking at one of mine the other day, and it was 4 years, 235 days. So I know that I could ultimately buy days to increase my pension. You wouldn't be looking to increase that pension pot.
Yeah, absolutely. Just seeing that 25% of people don't know if they've got a defined benefit pension or if it's a pension that's invested. Absolutely go away and find that out. Be on the phone to your employer or your HR or whoever it is that you can speak to. That would have huge implications on the thoughts around generating income for you and your family later in life. So yeah, really go and have a look at that as soon as you can. So brilliant stuff.
Oh, and we're back with a bit of self-employed now. So we've talked about the work-based, and then whether you're a defined contribution and you're within that traditional work-based, or whether you're on a more defined benefit scheme. But then I think one of the other things that we need to kind of talk about is, what if you're self-employed, or what if you're not working? Okay, so there might be a time when you might be not employed, you might be at home with kids, male or female at a time in your life. So we would kind of recommend for that kind of person is to have a personal pension. You don't really need to have a personal pension alongside your work-based scheme, because obviously you can up your contributions, you can buy years. So in that sense, you don't really need to then say, oh, I'd get a personal pension as well. So this is more about what if you've got no employer, what would you do? So for those individuals, you can contribute up to the higher of 100% of your earnings, or if you're not working at all, so you're not self-employed, you're not generating any income, you can contribute up to 3,600 gross. So you would take off the 20% there, because that is what the government would be putting in as well. Now, something that we do obviously need to make you aware of is that there is only tax relief up to £40,000, and that's your allowance. Now, if you paid more than that, there would be, you'd have to pay it all back, and the tax man would be there. So there's kind of a, you wouldn't really recommend paying in more than 40,000, would you, Joshua?
Not really. Just as you said, if you set up a personal pension and you make a contribution, your personal pension, they will automatically add 20% from the government to your contribution. Now, if for whatever reason, maybe somebody's either earning really well, or maybe you've had an inheritance or some sort of a bonus or something where you contribute 50,000 to a pension in 1 year, and I know that seems quite high, but maybe once in a career some people can do that, for example. And you get all your tax relief added on, there is potential that the taxman becomes very unhappy with you at that point. So I'd just be aware that if you're thinking about making a large contribution to a pension at some point in the future for whatever reason, I'd probably take some financial advice at that point. Go speak to a financial advisor to make sure that what you're doing is okay and you're not going to give yourself a tax charge.
Yeah, it's definitely something you want to try and avoid, because obviously you get the 20% tax relief when you pay it in. So ultimately, because you've already paid tax on that money, you pay it in, the government tops it up by the 20%. If you're as well a higher or an additional rate taxpayer, then obviously you've already paid your tax, so they give you an extra 20% back or an extra 25% back. Now you have to claim that through your self-assessment. I thought it might be slightly easier, but it's not. It's a bit form filling to kind of get that and generate that money back. And because of that, it is deemed sometimes to be a little bit unfair. So because if you're a higher rate or an additional rate taxpayer, you're getting relief at 40% and 45%. Because it extends your bands for paying tax. Ultimately, there's an argument about bringing in a 30% flat rate across the board. So instead of having the government tops up by 20 and then certain individuals get an extra 20% relief, instead of that, there's an argument for a kind of a 30% relief across the board. And I think this argument's been around probably a very long time, probably something that the government looks to do. And ultimately something else comes along, Brexit, COVID, and it gets pushed to a back burner, but it's maybe something that we might see within the future. Yeah,
it's something that you see sort of thrown around when you come to general election time, policies that come around. I mean, ultimately, if you allowed a 30% flat tax relief on contributions, that would highly benefit basic rate taxpayers. That's people earning between around 12.5 and 50,000. But it would penalise anybody earning £50,000 or higher, because instead of getting your full income tax back, you would only get a portion of it. So it's quite a challenging policy to get that one through. Then quite a political one, not one that I'm going to be involved in, but
might come along at some point, but not on the agenda at the moment.
May well do, yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, the personal pensions, this is something if you are not employed, either through public sector where you've got a defined benefit pension, or the private sector where you will likely have a defined contribution pension that you invest in. Some people, they do have a personal pension alongside their work-based pensions, but for some reasons, maybe you're taking some financial advice on that, or maybe you're trying to do different things with a different pot of money. But as I said, 9 times out of 10 now, your workplace pensions will have everything you need. And this really is for people who are either self-employed or unemployed at the moment. And really interesting to know, even if you are unemployed, you can still claim some tax relief to the level of 3,600. So really good stuff.
It's good.
Now, I just wanted to finish off, and this brings us quite nicely. We can finish off at 15 minutes to go, and then we've got time for a few questions. As I said, we didn't just want to talk at you for this for the whole hour, and give you a few things to take away, and just to sort of summarise as we've gone through, and make notes of this, screenshot this, take a picture on your phone, whatever you want to do. Check your state pension forecast. So if you Google that and go to the gov.uk website, you can either fill in a form, or I think you can do it online now. As Joanne said, that's news to me, that one. And you can get, they will tell you how many years of national insurance contributions you have. Do that for your spouse as well, really important.
Yeah, I would say the online is having a government account, so you can go in and track it. It tells you how many those contributions put. And I think that poll at the very beginning, not everybody knew how many years. So, you know, it's definitely worth going back and checking if you're not aware.
Absolutely. The other one, guys, is use your workplace pension. So these have come on leaps and bounds now. For example, I work with some employers who contribute up to 10% or more if you contribute that much. So, you know, make sure you are getting the most out of that free money from your employer in the form of employer pension contributions. So just check with them. If you are not, then increase your contributions to get their higher contribution. And as I said as well, that, you know, that a really good piece of advice I can give everybody is just increase your employee contributions as you get pay rises and promotions. If you keep your contributions at the basic minimums, you might get to sort of you know, the later stages of your career, and you've not quite got enough in your pension to retire. The sooner you can increase your contributions, the better. And the best time to do that is when you get pay rises and promotions, because you don't quite feel it in the take-home pay at the end of the month. If you all of a sudden go from 5 to 10% employee contribution without a pay rise or promotion, you'll feel quite a significant difference in your take-home pay at the end of the month.
A bit like what you were saying, that rise doesn't have to be huge, just a % on that, because obviously with compounding and on top and the investment that it's invested in, if you go from 5 to 6 1 year and then a couple of years later go to 7, it will have a huge impact on that fund at the end.
Absolutely. The other one, guys, is review any of your defined benefit pensions or other pensions. If you've gone from employer to employer, just as Joanne was saying before, you might have accumulated several pensions in the background. Make sure you know what they're all doing, where they are, how much you've got. You might be better off just consolidating them into one that's performing really well, or you might be better off leaving them where they are, particularly if they're defined benefit pensions. Know exactly when they're going to pay you and how much. Really just keep an eye on them.
And that's not plugging you as a financial advisor, but that is the most difficult bit. I mean, I've done exams in pensions, so I'm well aware as an individual what to do. But I think it can be quite daunting when you look at them. A big piece of advice as well is if you've moved house, pension companies they will try and find you at the time, but they will leave it until you're they'll send a letter at 65, and if it gets knocked back, it gets knocked back. So I would say as well, always keep up to date. So if you're sat there now and you think, actually, I have moved house since I've had a job, please get in touch with those companies. It was over COVID was something that I did and wrote to every person that I'd had to make sure that they had my correct address and details, because you will, obviously, by the time you come to retire, might not be in the same place you were when you started a pension when you're in your 20s and 30s.
Yeah, really good piece of advice there. That we do a lot of work with people obviously close to or at retirement who are older. They've worked for 40 years. They've probably got 10 pensions from employers that don't even remember where they worked, and you know, to track these things down is very hard, and you don't want to be in that situation. Make sure you know exactly what's going on. And if you get stuck, speak to an advisor. Definitely, that's what financial advisors are there to help with. And as Joanne said before, if you're self-employed, make sure you set something up yourself, please. Please do not just think either your business is your retirement. If you are self-employed, absolutely set something up yourself. Another way of getting some tax relief as well from a personal pension is if you are sort of husband and wife or spouse, and only one of you is working and you want to get some extra contributions for some tax relief, you can contribute to your spouse's pension as well up to that 3,600 and get the tax relief. So that's really useful as well. So make the most of those when you can.
It really is. It's a great way. You can even set them up for kids, can't you? I mean, it's a pension scheme can be done in so many ways, and it's really important that you start it as quickly as you can, or as early as you can, and then watch it go. And like you say, with the self-employed, a lot of them think there's a business and I can sell it at the end or it'll be fine, but it kind of takes away that risk. You don't know what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years, and at least if you've been contributing to something, you won't feel it as much if anything does go wrong later on.
Absolutely.
And I suppose then finally, last point.
If you're progressing towards retirement, and you're thinking, well, this is crunch time. As I said, when that salary stops and you need to replicate an income, you've only got one shot at this, guys. Most people only retire once and use their pensions to generate some income. If you're unsure, you need a bit of help, you don't quite know what things are doing, speak to some financial advisors, get some professional help. It really is the best thing to do. Many financial advisors now, they'll have free consultations where you can take your documents and your statements and they'll give you a bit of guidance there and then. So sometimes you don't even have to go through a full sort of paid service. You can get some good guidance from just an initial chat, or actually for you it might be worth taking on board a financial advisor to help you through retirement.
Which leads us on as our lead financial advisor for the day, Josh. Some of these questions I reckon that are going to be more directed at you. I've had a look at the chat. And some really interesting ones, and I know some of these people that have wrote them, so it's quite interesting that people really are interested in what we've been talking about. So Paul Raby's asked, my state pension will be reduced because I've been in a company scheme. I take it, Paul, that you opted out via the S2P before. He says, can he do anything about this?
So you can potentially purchase some extra years. So you can go back a certain number of years to purchase those years. I can't remember from the top of my head what that number is. I think
it's about 7 years that you can go back and look at.
Yeah. So you can sometimes get some extra years if you're going back as far as S2Ps because you opted out from the state pension in probably, I think it's probably the 80s. Have a look where you opted out and paid your contributions, because your contributions would have been going somewhere else. Sometimes that forms a defined benefit pension somewhere else, which is sort of the equivalent of what you would have had or better. So make sure you find out if you had opted out of the state pension, for example,
where that extra money went.
Where that extra is. But nowadays, if you're retiring from obviously 2016 onwards, everybody can get their hands on a full state pension as long as you have 35 years of NI contributions. So if you've got 40 years of contributions, you still get the full state pension. You don't get any more. So, that little gap that you have might not actually affect you potentially.
Okay, excellent. We've got another question from somebody else. It's anonymous. It just says the PLSA is an industry body, so they have a vested interest in us having larger pension pots. Are there any more objective independent sources of forecast of how much we'll need to have a comfortable retirement? The 33k figure for a single person.
Yeah, there are quite a few. Absolutely. We used one. They're all about the same, to be honest with you. I know you said that they've got a vested interest, but most of the research comes out roughly similar. I've seen one that was about 32 from a company called unbiased.com. There are a number of different sources. I can't remember the word now. A huge body for data. For economic growth and things like that, they have levels of sort of poverty lines and things you can use, but they're all roughly about the same, to be honest. And we've all seen how inflation's coming through. Everyone's energy bill's probably gone through the roof recently, and unfortunately it means everybody's cost of living is going up. Now, what I would say to the person who asked that question, their estimated average figures, okay, have a look at doing a budget yourself. Have a look at what your lifestyle costs you, do a household budget, and actually you might find if yours is 25, or it might be more, it might be 45, then you can base your retirement off your own expenditure rather than using average figures. You can do it that way.
Yeah, it's really interesting to say that, because it also depends what you want to do in retirement as well. So obviously that's based off 3 holidays. You might be somebody that just wants to pot around the garden and play golf. it's down to an individual kind of perspective. I would say, only because the job I do and what I teach, I budget myself, so I know what I need at retirement. I also know what I want to do. So in that element, you can really think about how much money you want to have. So I think it's about looking at your own kind of outgoings and kind of taking off those, like a mortgage payment that you'll no longer have in retirement. Fiona's asked, it's really interesting, so thanks Fiona, I hope you enjoyed it. It says, I have a pension frozen from where I worked prior to having a pension with MMU. It was an employee contributed one over 10 years. Does that just sit there, or should I do something with it?
Yeah, so once the contributions go in, if they're yours and your old employers, that's your money, that'll just sit there. If it's invested, it will still be invested in the same fund it has been. It just means you won't have been contributing to it. So absolutely, it will be there somewhere. Hunt it down, have a look at it, find out if it's defined benefit, defined contribution, and if you're unsure what to do, as I said, speak to an advisor or that for your retirement.
Fiona has put later on, she said that she's got a co-op one that's frozen from 10 years, and she also has a GMPF, which is a defined benefit. So Fiona, my thing for you is your defined benefit will just be sat there, and you would get, if you'd worked 5 years, then it would be 5/60th times whatever your kind of either final salary or career average was at the time, and it will just sit there again for a co-op one that's frozen. That pot will still be invested until they retire, so it'll just keep growing. She said she's not sure if she's got a choice and she needs to update her address, so I would definitely say, go ahead and make sure you kind of do that. I'll try and squeeze in these final bit of questions. Hannah has asked, can you backdate a contribution over £40,000?
You can for up to 3 years. It's something called carry forward relief, but you need to take advice from either a chartered accountant or a financial advisor to make sure that you're doing that correctly. So you can contribute up to potentially 120 and still get the tax relief. If you have earned 120 or more, it's still capped by your earnings. So let's say you've earned 60,000, you could contribute up to 60 and backdate some of it, but in any event, you can't go higher than your actual earnings. So just be aware of that.
Great. Elizabeth asked, I have a pension with 5 companies. Can you please advise the best way forward? I would say that's probably you and a financial advisor way.
That's a bit of legwork on that one. Unfortunately, if you have, as I said, old HR or old sort of company that you can contact, try and get in touch with them. You need to find those details. If you're really struggling, Google the Pension Tracing Service. It's a government website, and you can punch in some of your details and your old employer details, and it will give you some phone numbers if you're really struggling. Get your hands on some statements, absolutely find out where they are. That is your challenge. Was that Elizabeth that asked that question?
That was, it was Elizabeth, She's got like 2 minutes to do it.
You until Christmas 2022, and you should have your hands on absolutely all of those statements. That's your
not just the 2 minutes till the end of the session. And that answers Hannah's question, because she says, how do you find out what pensions you have? I don't know if Elizabeth meant she had 5 company pensions and how does she put it all together. And if it was that, Elizabeth, then I would say it's kind of seen a financial advisor, because you can move them into one, but it depends how they're performing. And I would say, as the Joshua, lots of probably different things that need to be looked at for that.
Yeah, if you're looking at transferring pensions of relatively significant value, take some advice, really. You need to look at performance, costs, options at retirement, definitely.
And the last question, if we don't get cut off, it says, is there upside transferring out of the company DC final scheme to your own pension? It says, if something happens to you, the full pension pot will transfer to your spouse, as opposed to in a company scheme, they may only get 50%. So if you were...
Death benefits of final salary schemes, they will likely get, your spouse will get 50% of your income, and then that will die with your spouse. DC schemes, they can be inherited by any of your family as a pension without paying any inheritance tax. So
you can also have the pot back, can you not? If you die before you've taken the pot, don't they get the full amount back into the estate?
If they die prior to 75, your estate can inherit it completely tax-free.
I have a feeling we might be at the end. Are we, Emma? Emma popped up.
I'd say a huge thank you to both of you for a really, really informative and insightful session. It's great. And thank you to the Chartered Banker Institute, the ICAEW in the Northwest, and Manchester Metropolitan University for organising this webcast. There will be a recording uploaded to the Chartered Banker Institute YouTube channel, and we will be publicising our further events. So thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you so much for all your questions, and we look forward to seeing you at another of these webcasts in the near future. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.